Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
Hello folks, welcome back to another instalment of the Napoleonic Wars pod and another instalment of War of 1812 month. A quick favour to ask, if you're loving the show, can you do me a quick favour? Drop a like wherever you're listening to this, sub to make sure you can find your way back, and share it with a friend. 3 really simple things that'll help me reach a much wider audience much faster. If you are particularly loving the show and you feel like giving it a stellar review, head over to Apple Podcasts where you can leave a 5-star or 4-star or 3-star or 2-star or even 1-star review of the show. Please feel free to add a comment as well. It's another really good way for me to be able to reach out to more people, and it makes so much of a difference you wouldn't even believe. If you are a mega fan of the show, bear in mind that you can get your hands on even more of this podcast by heading over to Patreon and subscribing. For just £1 a month, you can get an additional 4 or more hours of podcasting content every single month, because this podcast has gone weekly over on Patreon. There are a whole host of other perks if you fancy other things besides. Obviously, I do understand that times are hard right now, so I totally get that many of you won't be in the mood for it. There is a much longer explanation of the different perks and what you get and all the rest of that. If you've got any questions, drop me a line on Twitter at ZWhiteHistory. But the most important thing I would like you to do is to take the time today to go and tell somebody how much they mean to you. It's important to spread the love at any time of year, and in the run-up to Christmas, it's more important than ever. So be sure to tell somebody you love them, and I'll catch you very soon. Hello and welcome to another instalment of the Napoleonic Wars podcast and another instalment of War of 1812 month. This is, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be up front right at the start of this. I am completely ignorant today. Well, I'm ignorant most days. What's new? But I'm particularly ignorant about this one. We're looking at women in the War of 1812. We're going to look very specifically at the experience of women in British Canada during this period, as it was then, modern day Canada, obviously, before somebody gets very angry with me. And to do this, I'm joined by Séverine Angers. Have I pronounced the surname correctly there? I've tried to go French, and normally when I try to go French, I fail catastrophically.
Almost there. It's Angers.
Okay, so close but not quite. Séverine is a PhD researcher at York University. She did her master's at Kingston, Ontario, and she's part of the 18th Century Research Centre, and she has written about exactly this, women in the War of 1812. So this is going to be a really interesting session, again, taking a kind of different line on the War of 1812 and approaching it from a kind of social angle that we wouldn't normally expect. Séverine, great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thank you for having me today, and I hope you're well too.
Thank you for caring, first of all. It makes a nice change. But yeah, this is going to be good. And as I say, I approach this from a position of ignorance. So I'm going to start with what seems like a very dumb question, which is about the difference or not
Mhm.
between life for women in Canada prior to the War of 1812 compared to those living in the UK. Do you see societal differences and differences in expectations for these women?
Yes, I'd say like the life for women in Canada first differs a lot from the UK because of the environment. Like Canada is a huge territory. It's still very wild at the time. So you have a few urban centers. You have Halifax and Nova Scotia, which is the main one there. Then you'll have Quebec City, Montreal, and in Upper Canada you have Kingston, which was the biggest city, only 1,000 people living there, and then Niagara and York, and the rest of the territory is very, very rural. So most of Canadian women live their life in the wilderness, really in the much harsher weather where they have to adapt to winter. That's one thing that comes out a lot when they like British women that move to Canada, they write a lot. They're obsessed with the weather, so some things don't change because we still are really, and so they have to adapt to their activities to like it was quite common to just go and meet with neighbors, or like social calls was a huge part of women's daily life in the UK. That's not one thing, something you can do when you're living almost isolated on your little farm. So that's one of the big things, the adaptation to the environment. There's also the meeting of new people. So you have some populations that have been there for generation. If you're thinking about Lower Canada, you have families established there since the beginning of the 17th century, and you have other families that just waves of immigrants that arrived after. So the old population is quite adept, does not really consider itself European, still is much more that identifies with Canadian territory, whereas the new ones still have a very strong British identities. And they tend also to be curious about the indigenous peoples that are living there. So that's one thing too, to take they have a lot of relation contacts with the indigenous people too. So that's one thing they have to get used to. And also, I talked about like the how wild Canada is. So yeah, the idea of Canada as a new land to exploit and clear, that's another adjustment too, because the social markers that prevailed in England not necessarily hold true here. Like having a landed estate in Britain, that's a sign of social prestige. You have wealth, but that's not the same thing in Canada because land is given freely to anyone. So just a poor farmer can have as much land as someone that was like considered a gentleman in Britain. So they have to navigate through these new realities in Canada. Yeah.
And you were saying there about contacts with Indigenous
Mhm.
people. How do they approach those? Do you get, oh, I'm sure you do get all kinds of stereotypes kind of being thrown in there, but just talk us through that dynamic.
Um, yes, so there's this dynamic of the Europeans coming in, trying to use the indigenous people to their advantage, like for military and economic alliances. So that's a big one too. But they were in contact. They had alliances with the indigenous people since the very beginning of the colony. So they are very much entangled to the markets. Like they will some indigenous people will come to sell their products to markets in the city centers. So they will come to see the governor's castle, for example, in Quebec City to negotiate alliances. So it's really a part of their daily lives for a long time to be in contact with them.
And in terms of sort of the surviving material about these women, what are we looking at here? Is it sort of generally the case that we might expect that, you know, we have better records for the upper echelons of society and for your inverted commas average woman coming from a less rich background? We just don't have much at all.
Yes, so that's still as you can expect, yeah, women from the upper social echelons, they left a lot more written sources for us to work with. It's a lot of correspondence with their families. They wrote a lot back to their families in Britain. It was quite common at the time to keep diaries, so a lot of them have remained. So for women of the upper social echelons, that's the main sources that we're looking at. But we're quite lucky here because like parish records are extremely well kept, and that's one way to have some informations about on women from the lower social strata. So from marriage, baptism records, you can learn about their familial social background, reconstruct their social network. So that's one great sources that we have. And one that I particularly like, it's the judicial records, so for crimes happening in the urban centers. So yes, you learn about what sort of crimes, the social issues that were happening at the time, but also from the depositions of witnesses. Sometimes they are quite detailed about living environments and even clothes and social relationships of people. So that's one way to, it wasn't the purpose of these sources at first, but indirectly we can have access to these women of that can remain invisible quite easily if you don't read against the grain of it.
I'm instantly interested in the judicial records. You knew I would be.
Yeah.
Tell me, my reputation clearly precedes me now.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about what some of these women are being tried for, because there must be cases of women being brought before the courts.
Yes. So you have a lot. It's like some fights with neighbors, like a woman accused of having insulted someone in a city, or of having. There's a case of a tanner in Quebec City that complains about a soldier's wife that had attacked his assistant. So that's one thing we see a lot for selling liquors or alcohol without a license. That's one that comes back a lot. I've seen also cases of attacks with knives, but also women are often victims too in these judicial records. So you have cases. I've looked at a few cases of women that have been murdered by their husbands. So that gives us a lot of information, yes, about their living environment. And also it's very varied, and the terms can be quite vague and mean a lot, like insulted. Okay, that can be anywhere from just like the man was in a bad mood that day and just didn't agree, like a small disagreement, or very harsh words being said. So yeah, but very varied cases.
I also want to kind of discuss these women and their life, because this is the era, isn't it, of sort of the domestic versus the private sphere, which obviously gains even greater traction as you move further into the 19th century. So how active are these women able to be in local politics and in terms of tackling local issues? Because there have always been ways that women have been able to exert influence. It's just a question of how that influence is kind of spun and stated.
Yes, so the private public sphere, that's still a very strong debate among historians, like how much can we even use these terms to talk about women at the time, because we see they're very active in public life too. Like a lot of women would run inns, would run shops. One of the big difference too between the UK and Canada is women living in Lower Canada. They're not submitted to the common law. They're submitted to the French civil law, so the coutume de Paris, which means that it's a bit more beneficial to them. Like they can still retain some properties that they've inherited from their parents. So some women, yeah, have money on their own and can use it to run their own shops. And also that's one thing that that we see. Yeah, women working at the market and all, but also women of the upper social echelon, they can be active in local politics through the social events they're holding in their houses. So it's considered like private events because it's being held in their homes, like if they have dance parties or just yeah, have inviting some of their friends over to have tea and all. But it's very small societies at these places, like everyone knows everyone, so it's very important to maintain good relationships to like hold your social position. So in that way, like women, they also work with their husband most of the time, like to have him like secure his social position, whether it be like the governor general, like they change quite a lot every few years. So it's very important for them to come and to assert their authority, to build very quickly social relationships. So their wives will play a big part in that. And you also have women, they have sons that would like maybe to have a commission in the British Army, so they will yeah, talk to women, just give a good word, to help them secure yeah, a commission in the army. So that's ways they can get involved in politics and more the public life of the colony.
Do you see people coming over from England and kind of looking at the situation in Canada and kind of going, I'm not sure that's okay, because of kind of a distinction in terms of attitudes between metropole and colony?
Yes, that's one thing. Like people of British descent in the colonies, if they were born in the colony, they are not considered real British. Really, there's like a social, there's like a hierarchy of Britishness, if I can put it that way. There's one woman, she's the Anne Ilbert. She was the wife of a captain of the Royal Artillery, and she arrived in Quebec in 1807. And yeah, she meets a family who said that their son was back in England hoping to find a true English wife. So it's not considered, yes, there's this difference here. But also for some men, it was an opportunity coming to the colony, could climb the social ladder much more quickly than if they stayed in Britain, especially through marriage. In the records I found, you have ensigns and lieutenants that married very young, which is something quite unusual because they were not supposed to have the financial means to get married. But in the colonies, yeah, they had new opportunities for that. So they some tried to make the most out of it.
That's interesting. I guess we need to kind of start talking about the war itself, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the beginning, I guess. That's usually a logical place to start. And reactions to the news of the outbreak of the war, because there are two ways that you could logically take this. One is, oh, great, this is, Rule Britannia, all the rest of it, all of those cliches. This is going to go well. And then there's the other fact of it, which is that the contemporary perceptions are that Britain will not do well on land. And if you're living in Canada during this period, that's a really dangerous kind of situation to face, and that's quite scary. So I guess what's the general reaction amongst Canadians, but then also specifically from women, how do they kind of respond to that and try and factor that into their daily lives?
Yes, so well, first, the war really wasn't a surprise. That's very obvious from the records. It was really expected. Like papers in the months before, they were already like calling men to arms, and also it's really not a surprise. And more troops had been sent to the colony in the expectation of the outbreak of the war. So we know some of the reactions of the women, but it depends also on where they are in the colony. Like you won't react the same way if you're in Niagara, where the the war would take place. And then if you're like in Halifax, so quite far from the theaters of war, so like the wife of the general governor of in Nova Scotia, so Lady Catherine Sherbrooke, in her diary, she wrote of the day she learned that Canada and the US were at war. And she said that she felt very melancholic and uncomfortable, and that it was hard for her to shake her mind around this idea that there was war. So it's one thing to know it's going to happen when you know it's actually happening. That's something else. In Quebec City, the daughter of the governor also wrote in her diary that she was summoned into the midst of her French lesson by her mother to tell her, so America has declared war against England. And her diary is very, very entertaining to read. She's just 17. She just writes everything that she thinks. So it's good fun. And for her, like it thinks it's that Yankees are abominable, really, and that how they dare, declaring war on England and all. So she's very patriotic, and but she also thinks it's a good thing that war happened during when her father was governor, because she believed a lot in his military talents. And when we know what happened with Governor Prevost at the time, yeah, maybe she was a bit biased, but that was her reaction. Good thing it happened when that is in charge. And if we move further, like west around the place where the fighting will actually take place, so around the Niagara in what is today Ontario, it's a very interesting place when you go there, because you have the St. Lawrence River that gets very, very narrow at that part around Kingston and a bit before Brockville, Prescott and all. And you're on one side in Canada and you look at the other side of the river and it's the US. It's so close, really. So these on both sides, like they were used to have a lot of contacts. They were dealing with the other side daily. The communities were well integrated. You had marriages happening, trading, socializing across the borders. So after the war is declared, it's like, okay, this can no longer happen. So it's a big change in their daily habits, in the customs. So they have to change their way of trading. Those that were considered friends are now enemy. So one of the reaction of this population living really, really close to the river was to move out of the range of the fighting. So they moved in to the interior of the land. So that was their reaction.
I guess the logical follow-on to that is then kind of experiences of the war. I mean, you're talking about evacuations. If you're going to pick everything up and move it, you effectively become a refugee within your own country in order to flee war. But we're talking about an era when, sure, you've got public subscriptions, which can be a way of providing relief, but there isn't a huge amount of support coming from the state during this period, unsurprisingly. So I guess let's start with those people, those who are fleeing this conflict, and we'll talk about victims of soldier violence and so on in due course. But those who are fleeing, what's life like for them, and how do they go about sort of trying to establish some semblance of normality in a conflict that ebbs and flows? You've got multiple attempts to invade Canada during this conflict.
I guess for the most of the families who fled, they went to, if they had relatives, that's where they would go, first. But a lot of families did not have the luxury of having relatives that they could take refuge to. So they would usually, when there was an attack, there was what they called the flight of the ladies. All the women and children would flee the place for a few days and then come back trying to save what was left. And so a lot of families had to live through the war in what was left of their homes. So it's a new normality that has to install. It's a life having to flee becomes some sort of not a routine, but something they get used to, and that they know they will have we'll have to do at some point. Yeah, so you have some women, though they refused to leave the place. So that's one thing that we can observe too. Women that try, they know that if they leave, there's a chance that yes, their house will be burned, but after the troops that come in, they will ransack and steal everything. So they want to stay just to guard their homes and the few belongings that they have. Other families have relatives that can't leave because they're too ill, and also that's one of the reasons that some women will say to stay behind. um, but yeah, we can have a sense that women, they try to protect their properties the best they could, either by staying there or by coming back as quickly as they can after the end of the fighting.
Do we have any instances of women taking up arms to defend themselves, their property, their families? You can kind of very quickly let your imagination go wild and just sort of imagine, disgruntled Canadian ladies picking up a horse pistol or something and saying, "Look, you're going to leave my house alone, or something's going to happen." But what's the reality?
Yes, well, unlike in other conflicts and all, when we have records of women that sometimes disguise themselves, as soldiers and all, I haven't found any on the British Canadian side for this war. So maybe that's just because they've not been unveiled yet, but so far, nothing. We do have some anecdotes, yes, of women having soldiers coming in and strongly opposing to them entering their house. But one of the way women take a part in the defense is by acting as spies or agent of informations, because women were less suspected of being spies, and they would not be usually as thoroughly searched as men would be. And if they were caught, usually they would not have been executed, just taken prisoners. So there was hope they would make it alive at the end of the war. So yeah, women were used a lot to convey informations and to just bring supplies, even in a occupied territory, and a territory occupied by the enemy. So the most famous figure of that would be Laura Secord. Yeah, in 1813, yes, she learned. It's not clear how she learned the information that the Americans were planning an attack. So she walked 20 miles through occupied American territory to deliver information to the British forces that the Americans were planning an attack. And a few days after, the British were able to intercept the American troops at the Battle of the Beaver Dams on the 24th June 1813. So a British victory. So that's the famous story of Laura Secord. So and I'm sure there are many other cases that are just not recorded, but women that were in charge of inns and all, soldiers would stop by, talk, they could listen to conversations. And also there are many ways they could have helped convey informations or just provide supplies and all, but that are not recorded.
Did Laura Secord get any kind of reward for that? I mean, that's quite a significant contribution to the course of the conflict.
Yes. Not really during her lifetime. It's after the war that she was recognized. That's what happened, usually only after the conflict. But she did receive some money as a thank you for her service during the war. And yeah, today, when we talk about the War of 1812 in our history classes here, she's always one of the figure that is put up front. So yeah.
That's interesting. Do we know of any more? Is there kind of like a female spy network that's going on?
I don't know about a big network. There are some other names, like Anna Maria Grenville and Catherine Poole. Both were from Niagara, so really in the midst of conflict, and they both stayed there throughout the war. And so they were these two women are known to have delivered messages to the British Army and delivered supplies to both the troops and militia. So we know these two women, uh, but yeah, we can assume that they knew like they were putting themselves in dangers doing that, and despite all of this, they still decided to go through. So they demonstrated a lot of bravery and sense of duties during these war. And yeah, I'm sure there are others. We have to go through other records to unveil them.
So, how are these women treated by their own side? And I mean that in the sense that you've only got to pick up a memoir of British troops. Okay, so the famous one is going to be Spain and Portugal, but you could equally pick up a memoir of British troops in Belgium during the Waterloo campaign. And you can very easily see that the line between friend and foe does get blurred when it comes to civilians. And civilians often end up on the receiving end of some pretty horrendous things, whether that's casual plundering or something even worse. So how do these women get treated by their own side? Do you, because in theory, yes, they are British subjects, so the full hammer of both British military law, but also British civilian law should come down on them if they do any harm to them. But it's a conflict zone. Things happen. So just kind of talk us through how these women get treated by the British.
Yes. So usually when there's a sense that when there's an attack coming, they try to plan to evacuate women. So there's a notion that yes, they are more vulnerable to conflicts, and also there's an attempt to keep them secure. And that's one thing that soldiers and also militiamen, because a lot of troops were just civilians that had been called for the duration of the war, and they worry a lot about what might happen to their wives back home. A few months before the outbreak of the war, one reverend wrote in the Kingston Gazette that he called men to come and defend the colony, just to think about what will happen to your woman. So that's a rhetoric that is used a lot. So they know it's something that can happen. And yeah, as in anywhere, even if in theory soldiers are not supposed to harm children and women, that happens. So we have some records of physical assaults, aggressions on both women and children, unfortunately. Also for one of the very significant group of women, it's army wives at that time period. So you have a lot of women just following the military train on campaign around the Great Lakes. So these women, they're submitted to military discipline, and it's divided the opinion on the army wives. Some think they're very useful to the camps because they do the washing, the laundry. They are expected to act as nurses, so they're very essential workers, to use jargon of our times. But also some officers think they're a nuisance to discipline, because if they're there, men tend to be not as focused as they would be if their wives and children were safe at home. And also some women were very hard to discipline. Like in their memoirs, you have officers saying that they're really harder to control than men, especially those that have been, some women were born in the regiment and so were daughters of a soldiers, then became wife of a soldiers, widows, remarried twice or even 3 times in the regiment. So yeah, they had seen it all, and were not really threatened by military discipline. Like it did not really scare them. But so yeah, these army wars, they were women were not that well considered by the army, if we think in terms of like pension. There were no pensions for them at the time. The soldiers' pay did not included him having a wife or children. So it was a very precarious life for them. So it's more like, yes, you can follow the train, but try to behave.
A lot can happen in 3 years, like a chatbot may be your new best friend. But what won't change? Needing health insurance. United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans, underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage that lasts nearly 3 years in some states. Learn more at uh1.com.
Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
I'm curious, apologies folks, I know we've had a lot of crime and punishment rabbit holes during this one, but you've probably got used to it now, so if you're sick of these, you probably stop listening anyway. You mentioned about soldiers ill-treating women, and it's what I find curious about that is that it's so rarely dealt with by the army. So how do those cases get handled? Do they get handed over to the what I call the non-military judiciary, or are they dealt with in-house? Because I found very few instances of it being dealt with in-house, and I'm just curious if there's that tendency to go, okay, let's get the local judiciary to deal with this rather than making it an army matter.
For judicial records, I've looked at those mainly in the area of Quebec City, and those cases of soldiers ill-treating women, they were dealt by the local authorities. So it's the local coroner that will come and do its inquiry. So yeah, you find records of a trial for soldiers next to trials by of civilians. So but in wartime, I'm thinking it, especially in remote areas where you don't have any judicial instances, that of officers and the military authorities had to deal with that. So the environment, the physical context where they are would influence how they would be trialed.
That's interesting. Folks, you'll be relieved to hear that I have a list of questions that now won't get asked in my head about all kinds of things to do with soldiers on trial within the judiciary, but that fascinates me. But we're here to talk about women in the War of 1812 and not crime and punishment. So back to what we're meant to be talking about. And you've touched on this one already, but I just want to kind of give you the opportunity to say a bit more about it in terms of women's attempts to influence the events that are going on around them. You know, this idea that they're not just passive bystanders, and they're not just relegated to the roles of victims in instances of soldiers burning down their houses or whatever it might be. Yes, there's this argument that you've got these traditional gendered roles, treatment of the wounded, arguably for women in higher echelons of society. You've got charitable work as well. Just tell us a bit more about these different roles and the different ways that women are trying to kind of get involved in the situation, I guess, and just kind of break down some of those conceptions that we might have of women always doing the gendered things.
Yes, well, in war time, I'd say the gender roles are becoming more blurred, especially when it comes to work on farms, because a lot of women find themselves alone holding their farms with their husbands gone to fight in with the militia. So usually, especially in these small farms that were in the upper Canada, it's still very pioneering societies. So you need at least 2 adults to keep a farm running. And in normal times, the roles were clearly divided. So women would tend to the poultry, to cattle, just with clothing, food, gardening, and all, while men were more plowing, planting, harvesting and wood cutting. But with the men gone, it's women that are in charge of all these traditionally men's tasks. So that's one way that gender roles are blurred in wartime. But other tasks that the women undertook were very much gender and what you would expect women to do at the time, like tending to the wounded. Army wives were expected to act as nurses, and you can find in some army regulations at the time clear orders that army wives have to act as nurses. There will be consequences otherwise, and that's one thing that you see since like our Wolf came in 1759. He already at the time he said, well, when you have to ask our as nurses, and it's one thing that just keeps coming back every time there's an armed conflict. And also the charitable work, women, especially in the upper echelon of society, they felt it was a sign, yes, a call of duty, but also part of their genteel role, really, to undertake charitable. It was a way to assert their identities as women, the elite circles. So they will get involved in the local charities. They actively supported the Loyal and Patriotic Societies of Upper Canada, who was founded at the very beginning of the war to help give relief to some families that were directly affected by the wars, and also to give some recognition to men, but also women that had acted bravely during the war. And one thing also that I think is important that we don't talk a lot about, it's the emotional support that women would provide to their husband, even at distance. Because part of the experience of women at war is to stay behind, but that doesn't mean they're not affected. There's one scholar, it's Marie Favre, who talks about wartime, but as an affective experience. So just being constantly under anxiety and on alarms at the time. So even if when you look at their lives, it seems okay, it's quite quiet, they keep going to their social activities, they keep going on their walks, but there's still a strong anxiety that is there, like the shadow of war is very strong. And through the correspondence between wives and husband, we can see that there are strong emotional support. Like husband will write about their feelings on the war, how they're tired, sometimes they lose like their purpose. Why are we doing this? Especially after a battle that has been especially bloody, like it was quite easy to forget why you're fighting in the first place. So they would turn to their wives for that. And some wives also decided to accompany their husband all the way, like the governor General Prevost. He was supposed to be based at Quebec, but was in Montreal during most of the conflict, and his wife followed him. So it was their 17-year-old daughter that was really like holding the fort back in Quebec. So that support made, like, knowing that the house was well taken care of was a relief for men fighting.
There are two ways to go with this next bit, but I'm going to stay with kind of what you alluded to there, which is this kind of turning upside down a lot of these gender roles, in the sense of, as you say, if you run a farm, you've got to just pull your socks up and get on with the fact that life has to go on, even though half of your family unit has been ripped out and has gone off to fight. But of course, we do talk a lot when we study 20th century conflicts about how a lot changes in a number of senses. That perceptions have changed, or there's some kind of lasting benefit that is gained from women turning around and going, look, I did the job you did, and I did it perfectly well. Just think on that fact. So does anything change when the men return, or is it just back to the status quo almost immediately?
Yeah, you get a sense that it's mostly back to the status quo, because in the 20th century conflicts, women would get out of their houses, to work in factories and all. Whereas during the War of 1812, they stayed in their house. So like their living environment did not change that much. So after, if they kept plowing and cutting woods after the war, that's hard to tell, because unfortunately it's people that don't tend to leave a lot of records. So how did they go back to normal? That's quite hard to say, unfortunately. For women that we have some records, well, if you like Anne Eleanor Prevost, so she was 17 during the war, and through her diary we can see how she matures during the conflict. Like, she's confronted to loss. She sees a very good friend having to leave fighting and not knowing if they will return. So that made her think about what she wanted. Like, does she want like to be like her mother and live all the anxieties of being the wife of an officer? Or so she was thinking a lot about her future, or because of the war. So that was a trigger, and in the end she decided to stay a spinster. She never married. Yeah, that was how she dealt with that. So that's the case I've looked most at. But obviously for women who lost their husband, that changed a lot of things. For officers, they would tend to know quite quickly. Like, a letter would be sent to them by one fellow brother officer to inform them of death. But for wives of privates, or women, or wives of militiamen, you don't really know if your husband is still alive or dead, because there's no official system in place to inform them. So that's one thing that some women have to live with, like not knowing if they're still married or if they're a widow. And it can go on it's a situation that can last for years or even a lifetime if you never have any information.
Well, let's stay with that thing, because I know that's what you're working on at the moment, sort of ideas of mourning and so on. I guess, how does the mourning system work? Well, apologies, complete ignorance here, but are you meant to kind of go into mourning? I know we kind of talk about the royal family doing that these days, and we sort of go, oh yeah, that's a sort of olden times concept. It's something that I associate with the Victorian period, but everything has its origins somewhere. During the Georgian period, do you get families kind of having to do something like that?
Yes, you have some mourning clothing. It's nothing like the Victorian big mourning clothing, but yeah, it has its origin there earlier. And yeah, mourning in Georgian era, it's very underexplored, so it's very interesting because you can do a lot of things, but frustrating at times because there's nothing written on it. So yeah, they could have some mourning clothing, and not going to as many social activities as they would have. So yeah, there's a period for mourning for sure that we can observe. Also in wartime, well, it's very disruptive to the usual practices of mourning, especially for families that were back in Britain and with like a family member gone fighting in Canada, died there during one battle, and then they have to mourn without a body because they can't repatriate the remains. And usually all funerary practices are around the body. You have the washing of the body, usually the families gathering around for the last moments. Then you have funerals, the burial. So you can't do any of that without a body. So they have to adapt and find new ways to commemorate the dead. So when that happens, under those circumstances, usually objects take a very, very big importance. So they will hold on to some miniatures, some watches, anything that belonged or that remind them of the loved one, like will become their own private memorial.
So apologies, folks, another rabbit hole incoming here, but this one with our collective Napoleonic and Revolutionary War graves charity hats on, with you being our international officer. And it's about graves as sites of memory. And this has been interesting me for a while as I've been visiting cemeteries and trying to assess graves and working out what is a priority for the charity and what isn't. In the sense that you'll have a family plot somewhere and it will commemorate somebody, but then the person who served isn't necessarily in the plot for any variety of reasons. It could be that, as you know, you're alluding to here, that they're buried in another country. It could be that there never was a body. It could be that the individual dies in, let's say, Ireland. You can't transport the body back, so they have a grave in Ireland, but then they're commemorated in the local family plot. Do you get just plain empty graves? Do you get people kind of going, well, look, we're going to need a family plot anyway, so why don't we just take a plot? And I'm not suggesting, you know, that they bury an empty casket, and I mean, perhaps they do. I guess that's kind of one of the questions to ask here. But do you get things like that? Do you get kind of efforts to create a place, I suppose is what I'm getting at, where people can go? And I'm thinking here, and apologies, this is turning into a very long and rambly question, but I'm thinking of the memorial to Alexander Gordon on the Waterloo battlefield, which, folks, if you've never seen it, basically it's this massive outpouring of grief. I've never read an inscription that is so raw in terms of giving you that indication of just how the family's heart was breaking at Gordon's death. Do you get much of that, you know, attempts to create a place, a focal point, physical focal point, as opposed to an object of commemoration over these men?
Yes, very much. And yeah, the Alexander Garden is a great example of that, because having a grave, yeah, that's one place to focus your grief. You have a sense that you can go and visit there, so it becomes part of the ritual of mourning. So having a place, it gives some tangibility to, some materiality to death, and that's what's missing usually when you don't have a body to mourn. So I found my research, I've looked more at families in Britain, so I will talk on them. But yeah, I find a lot of epitaph engraved on memorials in their local church. It can be on their estate, and in one that I read, it clearly states that it's, you know, in replacement of a grave. So that's how their memory will live on through this epitaph. And it's interesting because you have the sense that they have to mourn both, like the family man and the soldier, at the same time. So you have they highlight both private virtues, so how kind and good of a man he was, but also the military virtues, so how glorious his death was. So there's really a pattern that you see on the way these inscriptions are constructed.
The other thing I want to ask about is just to dig a little bit deeper in what you were saying about the fact that sometimes the news never comes home, right? You know, private whoever ends up being buried in a mass grave. The records may not be clear because either records don't survive or they're not taken. Sometimes people, you know, go out and desert. That's one thing. But equally, if you're on a retreat and you get left behind, nobody really knows. Did you get made a prisoner? Did you desert to the enemy? Did you just die of exposure? How do families deal with that? Can you even deal with that? Because we always talk today about closure, and this is kind of the definition of never getting closure.
Yes, so that's very interesting because it's only at the end of the 18th century, like if I remember correctly, like in 1797, that officers had to actually record the men that died. So before that, it was not never thoroughly recorded like some officers would, but it was not mandatory. So before that, even if a family wanted like to write to the war office, maybe they didn't have the answer. So after that, since you have the information, families could write to the war office to see if maybe they have some more informations about the fate of a loved one. And you have some official forms that family could fill, send to the war office, hoping for a reply. There was also a scheme that happened I think it's 1809, that families could petition for to retrieve the possessions and the money that was due to the fallen soldiers. So some families could be informed of the death of a loved one because there was some money due to them. So the point was not to tell them that the loved one had died. It's just, well, here's some money that we owe you. But yeah, if it's a prisoner of war, if the fate is unknown, even if the family wants to make a request, yeah, there might never have an answer. And yeah, so that's one thing, that women spending the rest of their life not knowing if they were widow, if they were still married. And yeah, it must have been terrible to deal with. Like you don't know how you're supposed to keep going. For this time period, no research has been done, but that's one thing that could be very interesting to dive in. But some research has been done for the 7 Years' War, and you have some women that dealt with that differently. Some never remarried, like hoping that one day their husband would come back. You have some that did remarry, and then their husband showed up a few years after. So that could happen. Yeah. And when they would have had like children with their second husband. So it's a whole very complicated situations to deal with. So I'm thinking we could have some similar situation for the War of 1812.
I mean, you've just covered both what was going to be my next question there. So nice one. Thank you for that. But also you've done the segue beautifully. Because I was going to ask kind of, where do we go next with all of these kind of areas? And I'm not just talking about the kind of grief and mourning process, but also about understanding the experiences of women during this conflict. What are your thoughts on the big studies that need to be done, and the big questions that we need answers to?
Yes, well, I think some more research needs to be done on what we just touched on, like how losing husband can impact a woman. Like, does it change her way of living? Does she become more like destitute, like financially, but also all the emotional struggles that can bring? So that's definitely one thing I think we need more. There's some questions also about the lower a woman from belonging to the lower social strata, because there are so few records that we need to use those that we do have and try to read them differently to try to gather more information to unveil their individual experiences. And it's fascinating how some if you're thinking about general orders to like a regiment stationed in Canada, these order will answer to some problems or specificities to the place where the regiment is stationed. So from that you can sense, okay, there were some problems with women because they say that they need to be more more carefully like taken in charge or looked after. And also that's one way to deal with that. And also when thinking about women, they're closely tied with families, and that's one, and children that are often mentioned always in relations to women, but I'm thinking they do have their own stories to be told too. So that's one thing I'm very interested in, how children experience these events too. But they're even harder than women to track down. So that would be an interesting challenge.
How did you get into all of this then?
Well, at first it's because of my job. I worked for years as a tour guide at Parks Canada in my hometown, and we would tour like the fortifications of Quebec City, but also old military barracks. And during our trainings, we would get all the information. We would have to tell visitors, and army wives were mentioned, but that was it. So I asked, do we have more information about them? And no, not really. There wasn't a lot of things. So I was just curious, and my curiosity just led me to do my MA dissertation on army wives in the Quebec City garrison during the time period we just talked about. And yeah, so it's just my student job that brought me here today.
And from there, you end up doing a PhD. Out of interest, why do a PhD over here? And I don't mean that in a rude sense at all, in the slightest. But I'm just curious. I had somebody I knew who was working at the National Archives, who I'd get talking to during my trips up there, who said that she was Australian, and she deliberately came and did her doctorate in the UK because she felt the arguments back in Australia were just too parochial, and so she just wanted to get away from all of that. Now, I'm not asking you to sort of start naming and shaming whether or not particular professors in Canada just made you think, no, you know what, I need to come over to the UK and get away from this. Or that's not what I'm getting at. I'm sure the Canadian professors are absolutely lovely, but why do a PhD over here?
Well, for my research interests, I wanted to pursue looking at British military families. It made a lot of sense for me, like to go to the UK, also to be closer to archives. And also I wanted to have an international experience just to see how things are done elsewhere, because it's different questions when you have it's very fascinating how we're not taught history the same way, and like it's not the same events that we learn about, and also it's a very interesting confrontation. Like I remember when I first moved to the UK, I would hear like other PhD students talking and feeling like I don't know anything, because they were talking about all these historical figures and authors that I had never really heard about, because we focus on others in Canada. So I wanted to benefit from an international experience for that. And so I spent a lot of hours, browsing university websites to find a supervisor, and yeah, it worked out in the end.
I'm curious. I will stop asking you awkward questions about this in a second, but I'm just curious about the distinctions. What's different about the Canadian model to how the British do
it? Mainly about what the focus of things, like in history course, we do see a bit of world history, but it's really focused like Canadian history. So we will go very briefly around like the ancient Greece and Rome, Middle Ages, but very, very briefly. And then we look a lot on the French explorers that first came in the 16th century, and then the settlement of colonies and all. But also what's interesting in Canada is that each province is responsible of its education system. So the focus is not the same depending on the province where you're going. So when I did my MA in Ontario, they learned about the French period of Canada, but not really. And there was one student that was from British Columbia, and she had never really heard about Champlain and all, because they focus much more on the railway and the gold rush, So even in Canada, there are some confrontations. So yeah, to the UKD events are not the same way. The focus on the Middle Ages, the Tudor period, is much bigger in the UK. Also, the books that we have to read, like authors and also, yeah.
Don't get me started on the Tudors and how they might just be a teeny tiny incy wincy, ever so slightly bit catastrophically overdone, because there are about 10,000 books on them. I say that with a lot of love and interest for the Tudor period, but there are other periods out there, folks. Yes, they're very interesting, but there's like Firstly, there's more to the period than Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. Can I just get that off my chest? I'm sorry. Yes. We've gone a long way from the Napoleonic period. But Séverine, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. You are on social media, I believe. Do you wish people to find you on social media, or would you rather just kind of quietly observe?
Well, they can, but I'm really just there to follow people. I don't really post anything, so I'm not sure it will be beneficial for them to find me.
Okay, fair enough. We'll leave you lurking anonymously in the background of Twitter. But Séverine, it's been absolutely fascinating. Do let me know when the PhD is done, because I suspect we could, well, in fact, before the PhD is done, because we can very easily talk at great length about mourning during this period and graves and other related elements. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again in the new year.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's been fascinating talking with you. Thanks.
Folks, remember what I said at the start. Please remember to like, subscribe and share with a friend. 3 simple things that make a huge difference. If you're particularly loving the show, why not head over to Apple Podcasts, where you can leave a 5-star review, and make sure you add a comment as well so that I can get your feedback on what's working on the show. As ever, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. You can get your hands on bonus content, hours upon hours of additional material, episodes on the Marshals, on the American Revolution, exclusive chats on a wide range of things, in addition to a whole host of perks. Make sure that you avail yourself of those benefits if you are inclined. Obviously, I completely understand that that may not be for everybody, and whatever support you're able to give, it means a huge amount, whatever form it takes. Particular shout-outs. Those who are mentioned in dispatches are Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, John Haynes, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Andrew Leon, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Coulson, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple, Ed Koss, Indiana Fats, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meeking, Mark Anscombe, Bruins Girl, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Rachel Stark, Chris Pramus, Anthony Gombow, Andrew Wright, Graham Spicer, Keys Bishop, Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, Sam Gurman, Marcus Cribb, Robin Brasher, Hospitaller, and James Fluick. The Admirals are David Priest, Rob Coughlin, Graham Callister, Mark Duckers, and Michael Guest. The Marshals are Rory Muir, Bob Burnham, Matt Bone, Graham Swidenbank, Colin Zimmerman, Ryan Diamond, Sean Sullivan, David Maxwell, and Juo Teixeira. The Emperor, that's J.C. Kaiser, and the Legion de Scholars, Liam Telfer, and Todd and Laird Campbell. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe. A very Merry Christmas to you all. And as always, thank you for listening.